Good evening, everyone. Different setting, same Tanya. We're middle of Siman Yudal in Iggeres HaKodesh. We're on page 240. And let's recap a little what we spoke about last week. So last week we spoke about the significance of Rosh Hashanah. The Alter Rebbe is trying to encourage his Chassidim in their giving of tzedakah, and the Alter Rebbe noticed a flagging of their enthusiasm. Their excitement was waning over the years, after many years of giving tzedakah. So the Alter Rebbe sends out this letter, and the Alter Rebbe here is encouraging Chassidim, not only should they give with the same excitement and passion as they gave in the years past, but they should have even more excitement and more passion and also give more tzedakah. And why is that? What is the logic behind that? So Alter Rebbe explains that every single year there's a higher oir, a higher energy that enters this world from Hashem. And therefore, since every year has a higher energy, so we have more capabilities, and it's a new setting, a new situation, and therefore we're meant to feel not only the same excitement as we had in previous years, but every year is supposed to bring an even greater level of excitement. And the Alter Rebbe explains, so every single year in Rosh Hashanah, so what happens is, as he spoke last week, there's the Nasira, which means that Hashem loses his desire to be a king. So what happens is, effectively, Malchus, Hashem's Malchus, which is the last of Hashem's spheres, becomes detached from the higher spheres. That's the Nasira. The Nasira is the ripping apart. The higher spheres are Hashem's understanding and his desire and his feelings, and all of those are necessary in order to be a king. Because in order to be a king, it has to intellectually make sense to you, and you have to want it. But every year in Rosh Hashanah, Hashem loses his desire, and all the oir of the previous year goes away. And as we spoke last year, that in the hours from when Rosh Hashanah begins until Tkiyah Shofar, the world is actually running on fumes, because the energy of the previous year is gone. It's gone. And it is up to us in our avodah, through our davening on Rosh Hashanah, through our saying Malchias, Zechrenis, and Shofris, and through primarily blowing the shofar, to bring down a new oir into the worlds. And this oir is a greater oir and a higher oir than the oir that was there previously. But the oir that was there in previous years, every single year we have a higher oir, a higher energy. And then the Alter Rebbe says that the same thing is also true. This is how we concluded last week. The same thing is also true every single day. That during davening every single day, there's nimshach a new oir into this world. And after the davening, that oir goes away. So Zman Tefillah, the reason why Zman Tefillah is important is because there's actually a certain oir and a certain energy from above that illuminates during that time, which allows us to be able to experience a special relationship with Hashem, specifically during those times. But that energy is nostalgic. It goes away after davening, and every day anew, there's a new oir, and every day is a higher oir. So if you want to talk specifically, every single day there's a new energy. However, in a more macro way, in a larger way, this new energy every single year is a completely new energy. And this leads us to an interesting idea, which also relates to the special nature of tonight, of Rosh Chodesh Kislev. The Alter Rebbe makes it very clear over here. This is not his chiddush. This is brought down in the Sarma of Kabbalah. It's not pshat that we say every year Hashem says, "Oh, it's a new year. Let me add a little more light. Let me add a little more energy." No, at the end of every year, all the energy is gone, and we need to bring in an entirely new energy into the world. And the same thing as he says every single day. It's not that every single day just we have a little addition, but rather every single day the energy of the previous day goes away, and now we have a new energy. And this leads us to a topic I don't know if we ever spoke about this at length. The idea that although generally when we think of growth, we think of sequential growth, But the ultimate growth is not sequential. Sequential means you build on your accomplishments. You go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And then there is what we call a quantum leap. The quantum leap is the ultimate growth is not when you're building upon the accomplishments of the past, but when the only way really to arrive at that growth is by negating your past accomplishments, which is very interesting. Usually we say, if I accomplish a little, keep building on that.
On top of it.
But the ultimate growth is not that. The ultimate growth actually is by negating the past. In the words of Chassidus, between one yesh and another yesh, there has to be the ayin be'emsa. Between one state of being and a completely different state of being, a different state of yesh, there has to be nothingness in between. And the example that's brought down from this in Chassidus many times is a tree. That if you want to, and I think we've spoken about this in the past. Now, as I'm speaking, I'm recalling in Zerei Tzedakis when we spoke about that when you want to grow a tree, you put a seed into the ground, and in order for the new tree to grow, you can't have. It doesn't work that sequentially you get from a seed to a tree. They're so removed from each other, quantitatively and qualitatively, that the only way to get from the tree to the seed, from the seed to the tree, is you have to put the seed into the ground, and over there the seed decomposes and it rots, and then we have a completely new entity coming about. The same thing is also in human growth. If you really want to become a different person, you don't become a different person by building upon what you were in the past, but you really have to kind of negate what was in the past and start anew. Otherwise, you're always just going to be the same thing as you were before, plus a little. It's not going to be a different Metzias. It's not going to be something new. An example, yeah.
You said before that Hashem every year making something new. But I think David HaMelech said, "En chadash tachat hashemesh."
That is true. Shlomo HaMelech said that.
Shlomo HaMelech.
Right. Yeah. So what does that mean? Nothing. There's nothing new ever.
So how Hashem making something new? There's nothing new. It's always there.
Were you always a parent? Were you born a parent?
No.
So how you had children? You became a parent. How did that happen? Ein chadash tachas hashemesh. So obviously we have to have a little deeper understanding of what that means. Ein chadash tachas hashemesh. Doesn't mean there's never anything new in the world. It means something else. But obviously there are things that are new in this world.
How do you negate the past? What's an example of
So an
that?
example that's brought down in Chassidus many times, and I probably have shared it in the past, is the Gemara tells us that there was an Ameiro, his name was Rabbi Zera. And Rabbi Zera, he started off in Bavel, and at a certain point in time, he decided he wanted to go and learn in Eretz Yisrael. When he got to Eretz Yisrael, the learning in Eretz Yisrael was very different than the learning in Bavel. Anyone who's ever opened up a Talmud Yerushalmi knows that it's different than Talmud Bavli. The methodology is different, the whole style of Limud, and that was Talmud Yerushalmi. That was the way they learned in Eretz Yisrael. In the Shivas in Eretz Yisrael. And Talmud Bavli was a different way. And in Chassidus, it talks about it, how the Limud of Talmud Yerushalmi is a higher sort of Limud. There's more oir in Eretz Yisrael, there's more light, which then raises the question, then why are we busy learning Talmud Bavli all the time? And why is the halacha? So that's also addressed in Chassidus, but for the purposes of our conversation, the only thing that we need to know, it's a completely different style and way of learning, and it's a higher way of learning. The reason they didn't need the questions. The mashal that's brought down for it is that imagine you walk into a room and you're looking for something, but it's dark in the room. So how are you going to find what you're looking for? Okay, so you can say you'll turn on the light, but imagine the light, electricity isn't there. So what do?
Light a candle.
What?
Light a candle.
Okay, there is no light. You have to find it in the dark. How do you find the dark? So you tap around. Okay, so let's say I'm looking for the cup. So I'm like, no, that's not the cup, and that's not the cup. Here. I feel it. It's the cup. Baruch Hashem, I didn't spill it, even though it's dark. Good. But what happens if you walk? So what happens if you walk into the room and it's light and you need to find the cup? So what do? You just walk right over to the cup and you pick it up.
Yeah.
Right? So the Talmud Bavli, the style is because, as the Gemara says, b'machshakim ha'yeshivani. That Talmud Bavli, that because they were in a relative state of choshech, of darkness, so to arrive at the final conclusion, they had ask a question and answer, no, that's not a good answer. Another question, another answer. They're busy tapping around until they finally arrive at the final answer. But in Talmud Yerushalmi, the reason why you don't have that whole shakla v'tarya And there's much less questions and answers and rayas and pirchas and Talmud Yerushalmis because there's a greater level of oir over there. So Reb Zera comes to Eretz Yisrael and he wants to now learn in Eretz Yisrael, the Talmud Yerushalmi. So the Gemara says that what did Reb Zera do? He fasted. There's two different gersais. The Gemara, either he fasted 40 fasts or he fasted 100 fasts so that he should forget Talmud Bavli, so that he should be able to learn Talmud Yerushalmi. Think about that for a second. Why did he want to forget Talmud Bavli? You'd say, okay, I know one thing, and now let me move on.
Expand.
And let me expand my right.
You just negate.
Yeah. Because the answer is, if you're building upon what you have, your mind is always busy thinking in a certain way, and you have certain methodologies, and you'll never be able to fully arrive at a new metzias, an entirely new state, because you're handicapped by your previous state. Once you understand that to arrive at a completely different state, you need to negate your previous state to have growth. That's the idea. Between one yesh and another yesh, there has to be ayin be'emtza. Anyone who's familiar with Bali Tshuva knows how true this is with Bali Tshuva. To become a Bali Tshuva, it's not enough to learn Torah. Actually, step number one before you start learning Torah is you need to negate everything that you knew in the past. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to become a Bali Tshuva, you're going to start learning Torah. But you approach it with the mindset and with what we call the hanachas, the axioms, with which you had when you grew up, when you went to college. You know, it's not just that we had, it's a different learning. Our ground zero is different. Our basic ideas and understandings are different. And step number one of becoming Bal Tshuva is saying, I'm becoming an empty paper. I'm rejecting everything that I knew in the past, and I'm ready for a new. And you can't build upon that, because if you build upon that, you're just building upon your previous self. You're not becoming a new self. And this is true in many, many areas of life. I'm listening.
I don't know anybody that did that. That's
How is it accomplished? I mean,
you can't just negate everything that you've learned in the past. I mean, that's
You can be committed to questioning, and you can be committed to, essentially this is what it says in Pirkei Avos, what Elisha ben Avoya says, Halei mitorah yeled, someone learns Torah as a child, so he's learning on Niyar, what's the Lashon? Niyar Chadash. And if you learn Torah when you're an old person, which means that you've already learned a lot of other things in the past. So you're writing on Niyar Machuk. You're writing on paper that's been erased. The Rebbe speaks about this, and the Rebbe says what? The Mishnah is trying to make us feel bad. Imagine someone who didn't learn Torah until they're old. He learns this Mishnah, he's like, oh, okay. In other words, what's the point of this Mishnah? You're going to say, the point is that if you're a parent, make sure your child learns Torah when they're young. But at the end of the day, why would we have such a disheartening message for someone who's an old person? And the Rebbe says, no, an old person also could learn Torah like Niyar Chadash. But for an old person to do that, he has to realize that he's a young person. In other words, you have to realize that I know nothing, and I'm ready to accept and to learn, and with curiosity, and without coming in with any preconceived conceptions or notions. And that, because again, between one yesh and another yesh, there has to be the ayin ve'emtza, there has to be the nothingness in between.
Do you know any Baal Tshuva that was like that?
Absolutely.
That negated everything that he learned?
Not one. It doesn't mean that they said, okay, I learned 2 + 2 = 4, so now I'm going to negate that. I don't mean that. I mean, there are certain basic understandings and certain basic mindsets that a secular person has. And learning Torah is in order to be able to embrace a Torah lifestyle, you have to really dismantle those. It's not enough to say, okay, I am who I am, but now let me add Torah to my repertoire. You really have to dismantle the past and those understandings. And that's what Rabbi Zera did. He did not want to be hampered by his past, so he fasted, which is an incredible thing, right? And this Dr. Rebbe is saying over here is the same idea, is that every Rosh Hashanah, because the energy that comes down from above is so much higher than the energy of the previous year, you can't have it added on. It's not that Hashem says, okay, you have the energy of the previous year, now let me just pick up the dial. Okay, last year was 8, and this year I'm going to put it up to 9.6. No. The previous energy has to leave, because this is a new yesh, it's a new mitzias, it's a new something, and for that we have to have the removal of the previous energy. And this happens every Rosh Hashanah. And as Alter Rebbe then continues on and says, in addition to happening every Rosh Hashanah, it also happens every day. But Alter Rebbe is not giving us every single instance, but one of the very big instances when this happens is on Rosh Chodesh. And tonight we're sitting over here. Tonight we're sitting over here.
Just later.
And today was Erev Rosh Chodesh, and tonight is Rosh Chodesh, and this is very related to Rosh Chodesh. In fact, as we spoke last week, there's a reason why Rosh Hashanah falls out on Rosh Chodesh. What's the words we used last time? In the Chag, Shachodesh Miskasabay, right? That was the lashon we used. Shachodesh Miskasabay. Because the moon, in general, is a reference to Malchus. And the Spheres, the sun, is a reference to the higher Spheres. The sun is the Mashpia, the moon is the Mekabel. That's Malchus. Malchus is Hashem's desire to be a king over the world. And on Erev Rosh Chodesh, the moment before the Moiled, the connection between the sun and the moon is completely severed. There is not. That's why the moon goes completely dark. And what is the purpose of it? The purpose of is to have a new Ischachus, to have the Moiled Halavana, which is a new air, completely new air. But for the new air to come, the old air has to go away. All air has to go away. In order to be able to allow for the new air to come. Mm-hmm. And this is also alluded to in the Haftarah, which we say when Rosh Chodesh and Erev Rosh Chodesh falls on the Shabbos. Vayemer leYohanan machar Chodesh v'nifkadeta ki yipakid meishavecha. So this is Yohanan telling David. He's saying machar Chodesh, tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. V'nifkadeta, and what's going to happen on Rosh Chodesh? David, who is Malchus, right? V'nifkadeta, you will be remembered. But why will you be remembered? Ki yipakid meishavecha, because your place will be empty. This is exactly what we're saying over here. V'nifkadeta, you'll be remembered. And Chassidus explains, in other words, we sing over here so many connections. And Rosh Hashanah, one of the big themes is Zechreines. V'nifkadeta. What is the idea of Zikaron? So, Sasson, when was the last time you forgot that you were married? When was the last time? Oh, I just remembered, I'm married.
Never.
Never. What?
Since
Never.
I married the first.
You have to renew your marriage.
He has a very good man.
Okay.
You got to renew it.
Sure.
How about, what was the time you forgot that you're a father? You're like, one day you're like walking in the street and you're whistling, oh, I'm a father, I have kids, I forgot. That didn't happen, right? Okay. Even you had a baby a week ago, right? You managed to forget about it then? No. What's the name? What? Henna. Yiddish, Chiddush, and Achas.
A boy or girl?
What is the point I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say is that there's it's a basic rule. The idea of forgetting, you only forget something which is somewhat unimportant to you. Something which is of extreme importance is not forgotten. Period. The fact that you forget something automatically tells you that
It's a bad experience.
no, that it's not so important to you. That it's not so important to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't forget about it. Imagine you had a trip to Eretz Yisrael and you're planning this trip for a few weeks. Imagine that you wake up in the morning, the day of your flight, and you're like, you forgot. Oh, I forgot. You missed my flight. Why did I miss my flight? I forgot. Oh, the Taka is supposed to go there. Not shaykh. Not shaykh. So when we say the idea of zichroinus, whether it's on Rosh Hashanah or the V'nifkadeta, you'll be remembered. Chassidus explained there's a certain level of alakus, there's a certain level of godliness which is shaykh to worlds. It's a level that has a connection to worlds, and that level can't forget worlds because worlds are very important to it. So when we're talking about zichroinus v'nifkadeta, we're talking about being remembered. What are we talking about? We're talking about such a high level of godliness that the world is unimportant to it. And therefore the world can be forgotten, and therefore we turn to Hashem and say, please remember. So that tells us we're trying to draw down a oir, a energy on Rosh Hashanah, and also as we see on Rosh Chodesh, which is such a high oir that it comes from a place where we could be forgotten theoretically. Which is why we need to turn to Hashem and say, remember us. And that's what happens on Rosh Chodesh. Again, v'nifkadeta will be remembered. In other words, there will be this gili of a tremendous high oir. But why do we have the gili of v'nifkadeta? Ki yepakid meishavecha. Why? Because your place was empty. Because we negated our past. Because there was complete darkness. Because the moment before the Moiled, there was no light left. Only when you reach a place of Yipaked, a place of complete bittul, that's when you become a keli for the complete growth and for the new light which is going to come afterwards. You have to have the bittul in between. And this is also related to the idea of actually the names. It says, Vayemer loy Yehonasan machar HaKodesh v'nifkadata ki yipaked meishavecha. So this is Yehonasan telling this to David. Everything in Torah is exact. So David, we understand, is Malchus. And who is Yehonasan? Think about it for a second. The name Yehonasan is Yud, and then a Hey, and then a Vav, Nosan. What does that mean? So for those what?
Hashem
Hashem Natan.
But only the first 3 letters of Hashem's name. Why? So for those of you who were with us when we learned the Iggeres Hatshuvah, you know that the first 3 letters of Hashem's name represents Chachma, Bina, and the Midas. And the last letter of the name is Malchus. So the Yud Kei Vav, the first 3, the higher, which is the higher energies of Hashem, Nasan, who do they give to?
David.
They give to Malchus, which is David. So Yehonasan, which represents the higher energies, is turning to David Malchus and telling you that you should know that tomorrow will be the renewal of our bond. Tomorrow will be the renewal of our bond, the bond between the higher spheres and the sphere of Malchus. And how is that going to come about? It's going to come about through the fact that Ki Yipaked Meishavecham, through the bittul in between.
That was Shaul's son, Yona's son?
Yeah.
Over there it's Yehona's son. Do we know why he deserved to be killed with his father? Did we know that?
It's possible that it says somewhere, but offhand I don't recall.
Because he was a tzaddik Gomor.
Definitely was that tzaddik, yeah.
But Gomor, yes.
Yeah.
See, what you're explaining the quantum leap by having negating the past. That's called the quantum leap.
Yeah, because then you're opening yourself
jumping
up to
over.
a completely new reality. It's not that I'm stuck in my reality, I'm going to learn something new over here, I'm going to add a little over here, become another midah tov over here. If you want to have a complete change, to a completely new reality, for that you just need to negate what was in the past. I mean, even using a muscle in the world, and if you have a person, let's say who's an addict, and how does an addict become a new person? So usually the way that happens is
Cold turkey.
When the person reaches a place which is called rock bottom. Rock bottom is that place of Ki Yipaked Meishavecha. It's not. This is when you have nothing left, and at that point you look back at your life and you say, "There's nothing there that I want to save or salvage. I need to start from scratch." And that's the ayin in between. As long as you're like, yeah, it's 50% good, 50% bad. Let me try to build on my 50% that's good. And you play that game, you're not going to change. You're just going to be maybe a little better version of yourself. You want to become a different self, for that you have to hit rock bottom, a complete bittul, a complete ayin, and that's where real growth begins, because you're beginning literally anew. This is also connected. It's brought down in the Sfarim. We know that Mashiach, when he comes, Mir Hashem very soon, so there's going to be Tchias HaMesim. That's a Yesod in our Emunah. But what's lesser known is that it's brought down in the Sfarim, that before Tchias HaMesim, for a moment, everyone is going to have to pass away. Why? Because there's a pasuk that says, Vel Afar Tashuv. And that has to be Mekuyim by everyone. And therefore, for a moment, at least in a very momentary way, everyone's going to have to pass away, and then everyone becomes Afar. I guess when a person passes away, by definition, the body is returning to its Afar state. In other words, lifeless. Even if the body doesn't completely decompose, it returns to a state of lifeless earth, soil. And then there will be Tchias HaMesim. The obvious question is why? Why is that necessary? Okay, so you brought me a raya from a pasuk. I get that, but that's not an explanation. That's just a hechrech. That's a fact, right? So you say, oh, so it must be. But why? We understand there are many reasons.
You have to negate the past.
Exactly.
Supports what.
Exactly. To say it's the same idea. There are many. In other words, the fact why there has to be Tchias HaMesim. Obviously, there are many reasons, both in Nigla and in Ister and Kabbalah, why we have to have Tchias HaMesim. But if a person's alive, why does the person have to die in order to come back alive? He's alive. He's good.
He needs a new goof. though.
Well, no,
Different goof.
no, it's going to be the same goof.
An unperishable goof.
No, it's the same. No, but it's the same goof.
Same goof?
Same goof.
But how you live?
Why make the person? Why make the people die? Why make them have to go through that ordeal? Maybe it's not so good for the heart. What's
Well, depends how long you
right?
No one, you're all mace mitzvahs. No one to bury anyone else. They're all going at the same time.
But by now we understand that Chias HaMesim, within in general Mashiach, there's it's not as if Mashiach comes, boom, at that moment everything happens. We know that it's a process, and even Chias HaMesim, there's a shaila how much longer after Mashiach comes into Chias HaMesim. But the era of Chias HaMesim, what's called Olam HaTchiyah, is the ultimate state of existence. And it's so much higher than what we currently have that it cannot be, there cannot be a direct progression from here to there. There has to be that ayin be'emsa. There has to be that absence, that negation, that bit in the middle, and then you wake up, and now it's not, and now it's not something new entirely. And this is true to a certain extent every day also. Why is it? Think about it for a moment. Why do we have to sleep at night? I know certain questions that you ask me. But by the way, even scientists are puzzled by the trees don't have to sleep.
Animals don't sleep.
Well, some animals, most animals do sleep, but why? Why is it necessary to sleep? Think about it. The Eibishter puts us down over here for 70, 80, 90, 100, 120 years. And he puts us down over here to be productive.
And 1/3 of it is good.
And 1/3 of the time is spent lying horizontal
Schluffing.
and snoring. Right? What's the nekuda?
Some people, when they're alive, they're sleeping.
Even when they're walking around, they're sleeping.
Very much, I think we've spoken about this in the past, right? I think we did a video on this, right? But what's the nekuda? No, Ruhan, you remember? We spoke about this once. There has to be that ayin be'emsa. Imagine you have a bad day. So the bad day,
Carry on.
but imagine
on
that
and
day
on.
never ended. That day never ended. No, but Baruch Hashem, you go to sleep at night, and there's a significant, and you wake up in the morning,
There's always tomorrow.
Chadashim la bekarim rabba munasacha, and that's it. There's the ayin be'emsa, and now you start anew. And that is the idea of every year. We should know every year we start anew. At a certain extent, every day we start anew. It's a bracha. It's a bracha that we have. It comes Rosh Hashanah, and we're like, same old, same old. No, it's not same old, same old. You come into shul and you say, well, what's this new year going to make a difference? I'm already 60 years old, and I've been through 60 Rosh Hashanahs and Yom Kippurs, and I know the drill. I know already how it goes, right? No, there is no drill. This year is a new year. There's an ayin be'emsa. It's a new thing. This is not a continuation of last year. Today is not a continuation of yesterday, and this month is not a continuation of this past month. And this is true about every single Rosh Chodesh, that every single Rosh Chodesh is a new oyer, as evidenced by the fact that the moon gets a new light from the sun. And in Lubavitch, and very specifically tonight, which is Rosh Chodesh Kislev, brings out this point even more so. Tonight in Lubavitch is celebrated as a Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh Kislev. And we have Reagans everywhere, Sudas Haidoya. And why is that? Because in 1977, the Rabbi had a heart attack. And this was the middle of HaKodesh on Shmini Atzeres by night. The Rabbi had a heart attack. And it wasn't a Pashta situation at all. It was a very, very severe heart attack. It was actually more than one. And it was a very big sakana at that time. And the Rebbe refused to go to the hospital. So if the Rebbe refused to go to the hospital, so the hospital comes to him. So they set up at that time a whole ICU unit in the Rebbe's room, which then in 1977 was a much bigger feat than it would be in 2022 or 2021. Today you have things smaller, more mobile, but then it was a big deal. It took a lot of connections and there were doctors that came in the beginning and they ran away. They refused to treat the Rebbe. The Rebbe doesn't want to go to the hospital. So the Rebbe took a pill, and the Rebbe did not leave 770 for 6 weeks. The Rebbe did not go home for 6 weeks. And the most Chassidim didn't see the Rebbe for 6 weeks also. The Rebbe didn't, they came out maybe once or twice for Kriyas HaTorah, but it was a very serious situation. And Rosh Chodesh Kislev, Tafshin Lamed Ches, 1977, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the Rebbe went home. And ever since then, so this is what, 44 years ago. And ever since then, in Lubavitch, it's a day we make a Suda Seidah, and we celebrate that, which was something which was hard. It's hard to even looking back to fathom. Again, the Rebbe at this point, when the Rebbe had the heart attack, the Rebbe was in his high 70s. And it was a very serious heart attack. Chassidim actually had no idea how serious the heart attack was until after Gimel Tammuz, because the doctors never wanted to tell the Chassidim and scare them. But the doctors never didn't think the Rebbe would recover. And there was a big portion of the Rebbe's heart that was
Damaged.
unoperational, damaged after that. And the doctors were very, very concerned. And what happened amazingly was that not only, the doctors were concerned that the Rebbe should continue his work and the Rebbe should lighten his load, etc. And what we have afterwards, the years that followed, not only didn't the Rebbe lighten his load, but the Rebbe increased his load. And the Rebbe came up with so many more initiatives and continued. And this idea of between one yesh and another yesh, there has to be an ayin in between. The Chassidim, we see this, the Chodesh Kislev, as being representative of this idea. That as much as the Rebbe's work was beforehand, and then there was this little ayin be'emsa, there was this nothingness in between, which leads to Oyer Chadash. This is literally what the Rebbe is talking about over here, which leads to Oyer Chadash, and higher Giluyim, and higher Avodah, which is what we evidence in the years that are afterwards. And that's what we celebrate on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. And obviously it's been a long time since Chassidim have seen the Rebbe. And we're looking at Rosh Chodesh Kislev also in a certain inspiration, realizing that this is an ayin be'emsa. There's an ayin be'emsa, but the knowledge that the ayin be'emsa is only leading to a greater yesh, a greater time, the coming of Mashiach, the Kitzu V'Ram Mashiach Niyafar, and once again we'll have the ultimate yesh. So Rosh Chodesh Kislev, in a way, gives the Chassidim that the inspiration needed to keep on going, knowing that it's, as the pasuk says, Chavi, something along those lines. Taka, it seems like a long time, but ultimately this ayin is only here to bring a greater yesh, because that's the way it is in Yiddishkeit. That every time you need to have a greater yesh, you have the ayin in the middle. And really, that's the whole idea of Galus. The whole idea of Galus is this ayin, which is leading to this incredible yesh, which will happen when Mashiach will come.
But this is big iron, this guy.
It's a big ayin. But if this is, what does the pasuk say? Ki v'rega koten azaftich v'rachmim gedolim akaptzeh, right? So this is the rega koten. If this is the small moment when azaftich, if this is what's considered koten, we can only imagine
What's after?
what's the rachmim, what's the rega koten azaftich v'rachmim gedolim akaptzeh. So how great must be the rachmim with which will be the Eibishter will gather us. If everything is relative, if this is the koton, this is small. We can imagine how great is the rachman gedam. Okay. Now, before we continue, or actually before we start inside, we didn't really start inside. I want to focus a little on something which we spoke about a little last week, but we didn't really give it its proper attention. But let's back up for a second. Let's revisit the central idea of this Perek. We know that Hashem has the Sphira of Malchus, but Malchus is the lowest Sphira. Just like in the human beings, right? Malchus, which is Dibur, which is speech. And speech is the lowest of the faculties because the speech is Makabel. It's Makabel from... It receives and it transmits the ideas that you have, and and the feelings that you have. The same thing is also. Can you imagine a king with nothing other than leadership qualities? No wisdom, no feelings, no nothing. That's not a king. A king is someone who is essentially a great person. Like we had by Shaul HaMelech, that he was. That he was head and shoulders above the nation. And that represented a spiritual reality, that he was head and shoulders above the nation. The problem is that when you have a person who's head and shoulders above the nation, a person who is essentially a great person, the last thing in the world he wants to do is be a king.
You do it?
Is to be a king.
Be a king.
That's why in politics today we're stuck with who we're stuck. Because the people who are smart are not interested in it.
Interesting.
Not interested.
I'd covet all that glory and covet and all that.
So that's for an empty person. A person who's a chacham be'etzem, a person on the level of Shlomo Melech. We find this, that all the great tzaddikim and all the great malachim, none of them wanted it. Yeshaya had to be forced into it, and Yirmiyah had to be forced into it, and Shaul wasn't interested in it, and David wasn't. Why is that? Because if you're a person, if you're a great person, you need covet. That's an insecure person needs covet, not a great person. Now, the truth is that deep inside every single person, there's a desire to be a king. There's that midas hamalchus. There is that desire, but it's hidden. It's hidden, and the average great person is not there, is not looking for that. So there has to be what's called Kabbalas Hamalchus Ha'idei Ab, which is a big idea. The idea of Kabbalas Hamalchus, which is the nation reaching out and begging and asking, please be our king. And that's the idea of the Hachtara. The coronation is to awaken within the king the desire to harness all that he has and to be the king. But Malchus is the lowest level. Malchus is the leadership. The leadership comes after my seichel and my midas, and then I have what to lead with. If I don't have that, then what leadership do I have? And the same thing is by Hashem. That be'etzam Hashem, he wants to be our king. He needs that. So the truth is that the reason why Hashem created the world 5,782 years ago was because, Bereish Rubanusa the Malchus Kabbalah, it says Hashem had a desire to be a melech. Well, that desire lasted for 1 year, as we explained. And now, because then what happens is the desire to be the melech every year goes away, which is the meaning of the break that the Malchus is torn away from the higher spheres. Hashem loses his desire, his interest, and his want to be a king. And we have to rekindle Hashem's desire every single year to be our king again. To be our king again, and that's what we're doing on Rosh Hashanah. When we're saying, Melech al kol ha'olam kulei b'kvedacha, that's the purpose of the blowing the shofar, which the blowing the shofar is part of the coronation of the king. And we are awakening within Hashem the desire once again to be our king. But the way that the Alter Rebbe is framing it the whole time is to be mamshech chachma into malchus. Chachma into malchus. What is chachma? So chachma is popularly translated as wisdom, but as we've explained many times, chachma really isn't wisdom. Chachma is that you're translating one Hebrew word with another Hebrew.
That's like that.
Sorry, what?
It's a koyach ma, right? Koyach ma.
It's still not English. Chachma is revelation or exposure. And so in order to understand Hashem, let us try to we have to understand the way it works by ourselves. And that's why Hashem created us b'tzelem Elokim, because otherwise we'd have no reference point whatsoever to be able to try to understand Hashem. So look, the way it works by the human being is we're very complicated people, and there's multiple processes that are playing out in our psyche at any given time. But where does everything always begin? Everything always begins with something that is revealed to us. Now, that could be something which is revealed to us from outside of us, something which we become aware of or we see. It could be something which is revealed to us from inside of us, from a deep unconscious place within us. But there has to be something which to process. Once I become aware of something, then my mind starts processing it and figuring it out and playing with it. That's Bina, by the way. Bina is processing. So Chachma is awareness. Bina is processing. After I mentally process something, then comes Das. Das is connection. Because I can mentally process something, but it doesn't mean anything to me personally. Das is taking that idea which I processed and relating it to myself, making it personal, which is connecting. And if I'm aware of something, I've mentally processed it, and I become one with it, automatically what's going to happen is I'm going to have feelings. I'm going to have a feeling towards that thing which I became aware of. What kind of meaning? What kind of feeling? There are two general types of feelings. One is a feeling of distance, and one is a feeling of closeness. Chesed and Gevurah. That's the idea of feeling. So, and then after all that, once I become aware of something and I process it and I connect it and I have feelings, now it's going to lead me to action. And action is malchus. Because action is me having an impact outside of me, just like a king that's ruling over that which is outside of him. And the same thing is by Hashem. The very first energy that enters the world is Chachma. That is the first, just like in the human being, the first thing that there is in our conscious self. The first thing always is Chachma. Everything starts with an awareness of something. The same thing is within Hashem. There's the Oyer and Sof, and then the very first Oyer that enters the world before it's even processed, because the processing is Bina, is the Oyer of Chachma. Now, what's unique about Chachma is that Chachma, we talk about a Chacham, usually we say a wise person, but if you in Chassidus and Kabbalah, Chacham is actually probably more associated with bittul than with intelligence. And why is that? To be good at Bina, that's intelligence. To take an idea and process it, mentally process something, that requires intelligence. The more intelligent you are, the better you'll be able to process it. But the faculty of Chachma, what allows me to experience something, the more bittul I have, the more I can experience. Imagine you're listening to someone else. By the way, the smarter you are, very often the harder it is to listen to someone else.
That's true.
So if Chachma is about awareness and something and being exposed to something, the best way to be exposed to something before you're processing it is simply to take yourself out of the picture and take it in as it is, without any subjectivity, just objectively, which requires bittul. Chachma is always associated with the idea of bittul. That's why Chachma is koyach ma, which is the koyach of bittul. And why is that? Because Chachma is not me. Chachma is me absorbing something which is outside of me. Where does my mitzias begin? By Bina. Bina is where I begin processing. Chachma is actually me being bottled to something outside of me and receiving and taking in something outside of me. Which is also why Chachma is associated with Re'iyah, seeing, in that room over there. And Bina, you can come to this room over here. And Bina is associated with Shmiya. Why is that? There's what are you seeing in here? I'm sure. There's some the stuff I'm sure we've spoken about in the past. Hearing is the idea of understanding. Understanding Shmiya, like Daber ki Shemea Avdecha, right? Shemea is it's not about the sound waves. Shmiya is like Shema Yisrael, right? What does Shema Yisrael mean?
Understand.
Get it, understand it, right? Shmiya is understanding. That's Bina. Re'iyah, when you see something, it requires bittul when you're seeing something, because all you're doing is really taking in something that's outside of you. And what if it doesn't make sense what you see? You still see it. Why? Because it's not about you and your sense. It's about the reality of what you're taking in. That's connect, right? Chacham is connected, right? That's also a different nekuda. Chacham is someone who has bittul because he sees how every single thing is created at every moment. It sees how everything is being created every moment from Hashem. So that's why he's Chacham, that's why he's bittul. So Chachma is bittul and it's Re'iyah. So what we're trying to do at Rosh Hashanah, what we have is, we're saying there's a new flow of energy coming into Malchus. We say it's coming from Chachma, which means from the very source. Chachma is the very source of all the flow into this world, and that's where the flow is coming from on Rosh Hashanah. And with that Hakdama, let's look inside. We're going to start on page 240, where it says,
How many lines?
9 lines to the bottom. V'zeu shekosav tamid ini Hashem Elokecha ba.
End of the line.
And this is what the pasuk says: Tamid ini Hashem Elokecha ba. The eyes of Hashem are always on it, on Eretz Yisrael. She'einayim hin kinuyim lamshachas va'oras eira chachma. The eyes are a muscle, a kinui for chachma, as explained, because chachma is re'iyah, is seeing. Shalachein nikru chachamim einei ha'eda, and that's why chachamim, the pasuk talks about the chachamim. It says me'einei ha'eda, describes them as the eyes. Why? Because as we see, Chachma is associated with sight, with seeing. And now we understand that we understand why Va'avira Eretz Yisrael Machkim, that it says that the ear of Eretz Yisrael makes wise. What's the connection? Because since Eretz Yisrael, now we're understanding, Eretz Yisrael is Malchus, because Eretz Yisrael is Eretz HaChaim, is Malchus. And the Malchus is Mekabel from Chachma. And that's why Avira Eretz Yisrael Machkim, the ear of Eretz Yisrael makes wise, because there's a special connection between Chachma and Malchus. Every Rosh Hashanah, there's a new ear that comes from Chachma into Malchus. But by the way, now also l'chayre, it would seem that Avira Eretz Yisrael Machkim doesn't mean it makes you smarter, because that would say Avira Eretz Yisrael. I don't know what the word maven makes you a better maven. Machkim means that the ear of Eretz Yisrael should make you more bottle. It should make you more receptive to the truth, which is the ultimate wisdom. And this light of Chachma that comes into Eretz Yisrael, Av Shehit Midas, even though it is constant, Afa became nevertheless Eina Bechina Madrega Achas Levada Mimei Elam. It's not pshat that from the beginning of creation you have the same oil that's coming into Eretz Yisrael. Ella rather Shebechol Shana V'Shana, every single year, Hu Oyer Chadash Elyin, every single year the oil that comes into Eretz Yisrael is a new and lofty light. And as we spoke last year, right, the rest of the world we get the overflow from Eretz Yisrael. So every year in Eretz Yisrael, Rosh Hashanah gets a new light from Chachma, and the rest of the world we get what's called the Tamtis. As Rashi says on this pasuk, by the way, pasuk says over there, Eretz Asher Hashem Alikecha Doirish Oisa. It's a land which Hashem pays attention to, and Rashi said brings down from Chazal what, and Hashem doesn't pay attention to what's going on in the other countries. And Rashi says Hashem pays attention to Eretz Yisrael, and then since he's paying attention to Eretz Yisrael, by the way, he also takes a look at everywhere else. Obviously, we shouldn't take this too much b'hakshama and realize these are all the Dibra Torah, Kalashon B'nei Adam, right? But at the same time, there's this idea that everything starts with Eretz Yisrael and everything else comes to Eretz Yisrael. Because the light which is renewed and illuminates on this Rosh Hashanah, next Rosh Hashanah it goes back, because we need to have a light, a much higher light. And that's why the pasuk says, that's why the pasuk doesn't say Hashem's eyes are on the land constantly, because then it's mashma. Hashem's eyes is chachma, right? Then it's mashma that there's a constant hashpah of Hashem's chachma in Eretz Yisrael, but that's not correct. It's not constant. That's why the pasuk says, Ein Hashem Elokecha ba. The chachma of Hashem is on it from the beginning of the year until the end of the year, and then we have a whole new madriga of chachma that comes into Eretz Yisrael, and that's why it says Mereish Hashana V'Dachar Shana from the beginning of the year till the end of the year, and that's why it doesn't say Tamid Lo Elam V'Od just forever and ever, because every year it's a new Einei Hashem, a new Gili from Einei Hashem, from Hashem's chachma. And therefore, V'Lachem Ksiv Mereish Chaser Aleph. Interestingly, if you look in the pasuk, it says Mereish Hashana V'Dachar Shana. And the word Reishis is usually written with an aleph, but over here the word Reishis is written without the aleph. So we already, last week we said, right, the remes on this, that Reishis is Metishrei. You play around with the words Reishis, so you have Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha ba Metishrei V'Dachar Shana. So that's a remes, the idea that Rosh Hashanah is a Tishrei. But here the Rebbe is saying another idea. Reishis Chaser Aleph. Remes Ali Stalkus Oir. This meram is the missing aleph alludes to the fact that the oir is missing. The oir goes up. Shemistalak Lil Rosh Hashanah. On the night of Rosh Hashanah, it goes up. And the word aleph also represents the idea of chachma, because the word aleph represents the idea of. There's a pasuk in Iyov that actually says elfcha chachma. There's actually elfcha chachma, elfcha bina. There's because the word aleph means to learn. Like in Hebrew you'd say, right, Zeh me'alef, right? What does me'alef mean? It means
make you high.
It makes you, it's edifying. In English you'd say it's edifying. It teaches me. That was inspiring. It taught me something. So the aleph is remes to the oir of Hashem, which is missing. That's why Mereishis Hashanah at the beginning of the year, what do you have? The aleph is missing. And other places in Chassidus, it says that when you take out the aleph from Reishis, so what do you get the word? Instead of Reish, which is written Reish Aleph Shin, you get the word Reish Shin. And what does rush mean?
Head.
Impoverished. No, Reishin with just if you have it. V'larush ein koil. If you have just a Reishin without the aleph, it's impoverished. So that's another remez you have in the pasuk. Mereish Hashana, the beginning of the year is impoverished. Why? Because the air leaves. The air is mistalik. It's missing the aleph. It's rush. The year is a poor year. Until ad acher hatkiyas, and this lasts until after tkiyas. Sheyered air chadash elyon yeser. The by the tkiyas comes down a new light, a higher light. Shaloi hayameir adayin me'elam, that was never illuminated in this world. Air elyon kaza, a light which there was no other, never was a light like this. This oil from Chachma, it enters into and it conceals itself in the Eretz HaChaim above, which is Malchus of Atzilus, Ushalamata, and also the Eretz HaChaim down here in this world, which is Eretz Yisrael. Lahachyes es kol ha'olamas, and that gives life to all the worlds. Kol Meshach Shana Zu, for the entirety of this year. However, Giluya Mehester Hazeh, to reveal it from its state of concealment, Tali b'Maisa Tachtoinim is Chusam v'Tshuvasam. It depends on the actions of those over here in this world, and there's Chus and the Tshuva Baseres to make Tshuva V'dal.
What's V'dal mean?
V'dayla maybe.
V'dal maybe.
V'dayla maybe. So there's actually a deep idea over here. Well, the Rebbe is telling us that yes, the oil comes down. The oil comes down on Rosh Hashanah by Tkiyas, but the revelation is through our mitzvahs in our zechusim throughout Asar Shemei Tshuva. What's that all about? Okay, I wasn't actually thinking of going into this area, but we have a few minutes left, and we finished the Pedic, so we may as well. In Chassidus, the question is asked. We know we're saying that when it comes Erev Rosh Hashanah, Hashem loses interest in being a melech. So what are we going to do? We're going to blow shofar. And if we're blowing shofar, that means that's going to get Hashem excited, and he's going to decide he wants to be the melech, and he's going to decide he wants to create the world for another year, and he's going to decide that he wants to be mashpia, a new level of chachma into this world. But there's a problem with that theory. The problem with that theory is a mitzvah comes from a melech. The melech is the one who gives commandments, and when you follow his commandments, that makes him happy. If he didn't care about whether you followed the commandments or not, he wouldn't give them, right? So obviously, it's negeya to the melech, it's negeya to the king, that the people should follow the commandments that he gives them, otherwise he wouldn't give them. So if Hashem is in a matziv of melech, if Hashem is in the place where he wants to be the king, and he wants to give us mitzvahs, then we understand how then we do the mitzvahs, that makes him happy, and Hashem is mashpia to us, all good, begashmias and beruchnias. The problem is, when it comes Rosh Hashanah, we're going to blow the shofar and say, Hashem, look, we're doing the mitzvah, we're blowing shofar, and Hashem is saying, I get you blowing shofar, but I'm not interested in being a melech. I'm not interested in being a melech. I don't care if you do a mitzvahs. So then how is it that our blowing the shofar is able to be ma'oder Hashem's tainug and ratzon in creating worlds, if the whole point is that Hashem is not he's not attracted right now to being a melech. If he's not a melech, he's not even interested in giving us mitzvahs. And how is doing a mitzvah, how is that accomplishing anything? So therefore, Chassidus explained that Taka, when we're blowing shofar, even though Taka, shofar is a mitzvah, but what evokes Hashem's desire to be the king is not the mitzvah aspect of it. It's something deeper there. There's what's called the Kalapanima in the shofar. What we're doing when we're blowing the shofar is not we're saying, Hashem, take a look, we're doing a mitzvah. It's actually a call from the deepest part of who we are, the deepest place within ourselves, the Mimamakim Kirasicha Hashem. And we're trying to reach the deepest part in Hashem, the place in Hashem where his connection to us is taki even higher than mitzvahs. Because we know, ultimately, our connection to Hashem, the connection of Kal Yisrael to Hashem, predates mitzvahs. How do we know that? Because you look in the Torah, and the Torah says, Dabrel b'nei Yisrael, Shabbos b'nei Yisrael. That means that the mitzvahs were created for us. They're addressed to us. It's not we were created to do mitzvahs. Mitzvahs were created for us. In the words of the Talmud V'Eliyahu, Machshavtan shal Yisrael kodma l'chol davar. We come even before Torah mitzvahs. And that's what we're trying to tap into. We're trying to tap into our essential connection to Hashem, our kesher asmi with Hashem, which is even beyond mitzvahs. And that's what we're doing through blowing shofar. And we accomplish that. And then the Hashem, the Oyer comes down into Malchus. But ultimately, in order to bring the Oyer Begilui, we need to start doing mitzvahs. Because the Gilui of everything is through Torah mitzvahs. And that's why in Rosh Hashanah, through blowing the shofar, we bring down the Oyer. But still, as the Alter Rebbe says over there, at that point, the Oyer is mistater. Be'eretz HaChaim shalamaylo shalamata. The Oyer is concealed. And then after is Giluye Mahester Azeh. We want to reveal it. That's totally the Ma'aseh Tachtonim. That depends on our actions. Because once on Rosh Hashanah we get Hashem to say, I want to be the king, suddenly, if Hashem is our king, he wants us to do mitzvahs. And if we do mitzvahs, he gives him nachas. And when we give him nachas, that's when that Oyer comes down Begilui. So therefore the Oyer comes Rosh Hashanah. We're megala it completely throughout the Aseres Mechuvah, through our mitzvahs. And then we enjoy for the rest of the year this Oyer HaKodesh that wasn't there until since the beginning of time. And this is where the letter ends in Iggeres HaKodesh. However, in the actual letter which the Alter Rebbe wrote, which was edited out, the Alter Rebbe that continues and says, okay, and therefore Rabbi say, more money, exactly. That's where it gets down to.
Charity.
The tzedakah this year, the tzedakah which you're giving for Eretz Yisrael, for Eretz HaChaim, has to be more than the year before. And that is the nekuda of this letter. And although it's a letter about tzedakah, as mentioned last week, it's really a letter that applies to every mitzvah. You should know that every single mitzvah, every year is a new year, and every single year we have to do mitzvahs with more chayis, with more Yislavos, and always being ma'alon b'kodesh.